Hey guys, welcome back to a page in the chapter, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Paige and today we are doing my March wrap up. It is spring. Spring has sprung. It may have snowed yesterday, but spring is still sprung. And the months are just absolutely flying by. I read 7 books in the month of March, which is honestly so much better than I have done in previous months. I feel like my reading was really starting to look up in the month of March. Hopefully I can carry that forward into April. I felt like March was very slumpy getting started. Like, as you guys may have seen, I ended up scrapping my whole TBR. I was feeling so slumpy. We were halfway through the month and I hadn't finished a book yet, and then scrapping my TBR really worked for me because I've read 7 books in the past, let's say 2.5 weeks. So I'm quite proud of myself, and as I said, I'm really hoping to carry that momentum through into April. My April TBR is already live if you want to go and check that out. If you guys like seeing TBRs and wrap-ups, then I have a whole playlist dedicated to those two things. You can go and binge watch all of them if you would like to. I also post a TBR and a wrap-up every single month, so do feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below because you don't want to miss them. If that's the kind of content that you like, then I post a lot of it, so feel free to subscribe if you would like to. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at @PageInChapter so that you can see what I'm reading and how I'm reviewing it in real time rather than having to wait a whole month to see my reviews of things. You are more than welcome to do so. And without further ado, let's get into the books that I read in March. So the first book that I read in March, I have spoken about a lot, I have reviewed a lot. I didn't want to read this book, and then I saw it in like a 2 for £8 deal in Tesco or something. Given my slump, I thought maybe it was time to finally give this book a go, and that is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This is an academic setting, fake dating, contemporary romance book. It follows our main character Olive, and she is a 3rd-year PhD candidate, and she ends up in a fake dating situation with one of the professors in her biology lab, Adam. I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 4 stars. I had such a good time with it. Romance was just everything that I would have wanted it to be. I found myself really rooting for Adam and Olive. A lot of the problems that they had were all very understandable. They didn't feel so big that I couldn't believe that they could move past them, but they also weren't so small and annoying that it was like, this is a stupid book. I thought that the actual fake dating situation was very believable too. Like, I understood why Adam particularly would want to be involved in the fake dating. The reason that Olive was seeking out the fake dating was a little bit silly, but still believable, you know? Like, I've read much more ridiculous fake dating tropes. It worked for me. I love this book. However, I did have to dock a star for the women in STEM representation. I've spoken a little bit about this in my channel update. As someone who wants to or was considering doing a PhD, this book really kind of put me off. Ali Hazelwood herself has a PhD, but she's not publishing with a PhD. When you read the author's note and you find out she has a PhD, it becomes a bit clear of, oh, she's being self-deprecating. But if you don't read the author's note and know she has a PhD, it just kind of looks like she's really putting down people who do PhDs. I do appreciate that this is an adult romance, and so young girls were not its target audience. But if you're gonna stick a TikTok sensation sticker on it, then you know that young girls are going to be reading it. Let's maybe not put them off going into STEM. There's also absolutely horrendous things that happen to Olive as a woman in STEM. And so whilst I love this book and I loved the way that the academic background was integrated into the story, I had to dock a star for it. I thought it was really toxic. But other than that, I adored this book. I will be rereading it all the time. It does deserve the hype that it gets, and to be honest, I can forgive it for the STEM rep because, as I said, when it was written and published, it was aimed at people who already had jobs, so it obviously wasn't its intention to really be doing that. I love this book. So then following that, I thought that I would kind of stick with the contemporary romances mood. Since that I had apparently managed to finish a book in that genre, I should just keep going. And so I picked up The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas because I'd seen this also like floating around in the booktube community and on BookTok. These two books, The Love Hypothesis and The Spanish Love Deception, seem to kind of be spoken about in conjunction, and that would be because they are both like fake dating tropes. I gave this book a 2 stars and I have since seen a lot of reviews that were very like bad reviews that reading them was like, yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. So this follows our main character Catalina, and she is Spanish but living in New York and working in New York, and she has an absolute like hatred to this man in her office called Aaron, and then she desperately needs a date to her sister's wedding in Spain, and he offers to step in and be her fake date. And so that's kind of how the whole situation comes about. There aren't many good things about this book, but I will start with the good ones. It was absolutely fine. Like, I was able to finish it. It didn't put me in a slump. Like, I did want to keep reading to see what would happen between our main characters. Like, it was just fine, fun, like adult romance to read. The smut was well written and like kind of worth the wait. I'll admit that was like what I was holding out for with this book, and I got there and I did think that it was like worth me continuing to read for the smut. It was, you know, perfectly fine, pretty good. And that would be about it for the positives. The negatives are that the whole point is he's supposed to be her fake date to a wedding in Spain. It takes more than half the book to get to this wedding in Spain, and then it's literally over in less than a chapter and they're back in New York again. I understand why it's called The Spanish Love Deception, but it's also not set really in Spain at all. And this book is a hate to love fake dating office romance, and our author has spent so long trying to do all of those things that then all of the motivations of our characters and the reasons that they do these things just seem trite and stupid. Like, the reason Catalina hates Aaron so that it can be a hate to love office romance is just the absolute stupidest reason. She has no reason to hate him at all, but obviously she has to hate him in an office way so that it can be both of those things, and it was just very, very, very stupid. And it tries so hard to do 3 big tropes that it doesn't really execute any of them well. And then like the third big thing that I did not enjoy was our love interest Aaron. To me, like, this is a very personal thing, but to me he was so intense and so creepy. Like, it bordered on maybe she should have gotten a restraining order type of intense. It's also not really an enemies to lovers. He's very clearly in love with her like from the beginning, but he goes about it in the creepiest way, and he's just too intense for my personal liking. Like, it was giving me the ick on the page. There was more bad than good in this book, but I gave it 2 stars because I was able to finish it, and I don't remember the experience as being absolutely horrendous. It was just a very big letdown coming off of The Love Hypothesis, and because I'd seen this book around so much, I was really expecting good things from this, and I was very disappointed. And so then I started my 24-hour challenge, which is already up on my channel. It is my Bookstagram Decides My 24-Hour Reading Challenge video. I would love it if you guys could go and check that video out. I'm so proud of it. And so the first book that you guys voted for me to read was Gallant by V.E. Schwab, and I am very happy that I picked this one up. I gave this a 4.5 stars, I believe. It wasn't quite a 5 stars. I felt like the ending let it down for me, but I loved every second of reading it. Like, you can go and watch that footage back and I'm just grinning from ear to ear the entire time reading it. I had so much fun. So this follows our main character Olivia Pryor, and she is an orphan living in like an all-girls orphanage slash school type of situation, and then one day a letter arrives telling her that she has like a long lost uncle and inviting her to go and live at his house Gallant. However, when Olivia arrives at Gallant, she discovers that her uncle has been dead for over a year, and there's absolutely no way that he could have sent that letter to her. However, she's invited to stay and continue living at Gallant, but she has to stay inside after dark and avoid the wall in the garden. And of course, Olivia fails at doing both of those things. My favourite thing about this book was that the daytime sections of this book were so evocative of spring. Like, I was reading it with like the sun streaming through the window, and I was like, oh my god, I see why this was released in March. Like, it's the perfect spring read. It's beautifully written. There's all this natural language and metaphors, and it's just beautiful. And then you get to the nighttime scenes and you go back to like classic V.E. Schwab creepiness and just the, oh, maybe I should be reading this in October, and oh, this is actually like setting me on edge a little bit. V.E. Schwab is just such a beautiful writer. Oh my god, I love everything that she writes. This did not miss the mark for me. I really loved it. I did think that the ending was just a little bit anticlimactic, but it is a bit hard to say in a 24-hour reading challenge when you are rushing to read. Also, don't be fooled by this book. It is pocket-sized, but this is like a full 400-page book. I don't quite know how they've managed to make it look so small, but this is a full-size fantasy book. Beware. You guys then voted for me to read Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the second book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. Now, I didn't love Get a Life Chloe Brown too much. I don't particularly like the whole bucket list like trope in books. I also just, Chloe as a person wasn't my favourite person, and I just didn't love her romance. Like, the big thing for me was that when she had her big conflict with Red, I felt like there wasn't enough time at the end of the book for me to believe that they would stay together. Like, it felt like the resolution to their conflict was literally like the ending of the book. So I kind of left that book feeling like I wasn't rooting for them, I didn't believe in them, and that I just didn't really care for their relationship. So I was very nervous to go into Dani Brown, but I wanted to because I'd heard much better things about the rest of the series, and Dani Brown is fake dating, which, as we can tell, I'm a little bit obsessed with right now. So when you guys voted for me to read this book, I was very happy to go into it. Dani Brown was much more fun than Chloe Brown. I enjoyed it so much more. Dani Brown as a character just felt so much more mature. She was just someone I could very easily see myself being friends with. Like, she has that very bubbly, outgoing, self-deprecating and TMI like sense of humour. Like, I love people who will make jokes that are like way too like TMI. Like, it's just, I love it. Like, please feel free to be that comfortable with me. And it just really like set me up on a good note with Dani Brown. Like, I just found her a much more interesting character to read about. Again, she is like based in academia as well, so given I have an interest in going into that, I think I just related to her a little bit more and understood where she was coming from a lot more. And yeah, as I said, she just felt like a much more realistic and mature adult. I also had absolutely no issues with the romance in Dani Brown. I again just found it very believable. They had a very sexual way of like joking with each other that I found very funny, and I just enjoyed seeing their romance play out. Way more fun than the first book, and I just found it so much more believable, and I didn't think believability was something that I needed in a romance book, but apparently I do. So I gave Dani Brown a 3 stars. By last year's ranking that would have been a 4 stars, but I've like reshifted my star rankings. So I think technically both Chloe Brown and Dani Brown have the same star ratings, but only because I've shifted my rating system. I then read Girl, Serpent, Thorne by Melissa Bashadaust. This follows our main character Soraya, I think it's Soraya, and she is a princess, but she is cursed so that anytime anyone touches her, she poisons them and they immediately die. And it's very much a story about her trying to work out, is she a princess or is she a monster? Can she ever be both? Is she actually the villain? And also about her working with a demon to try and undo the curse that has been placed on her, and figuring out why this curse was even placed on her. As a fantasy, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very creative. Some of the events of this book I did find a little bit boring, but I thought all in all, like the world building and the magic system and the answers to why is she poisoned were all very satisfying, creative and lovely to read about. But I hated the romance elements of this book. It felt very much like our author wanted to do a will they won't they, she has multiple options type of book. But for such a short fantasy standalone, normally like if a fantasy is going to be a standalone it would be twice this size, but this is just scraping 300 pages. There wasn't really enough room in the book for any type of will they won't they type of feeling. I didn't feel like I got to connect to any of the love interests or was really rooting for any of them in any way, and it just felt very tacked on. Like there was this solid fantasy and then it was like our author was like, no, I've got to put a romance in there, and just kind of like tacked it on the end. Like it all felt very fantasy, she ends up with someone. You know, like there wasn't a lot of build up to that. The romance didn't feel particularly embedded within the storyline. It was just kind of there. And so I didn't really enjoy that element of the book. And I have not rated this book or given it a star rating because I don't think it's fair for me to do that until I can reread it in a non-24-hour challenge setting. If you think that this book could be for you, I definitely recommend picking it up and giving it a go. It's definitely not even close to a bad book. I just don't know if it was really for me. And so then the final book that you guys voted I pick up, but I did not get to finish in that video, is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, and I am obsessed with this book. I gave this a 5 stars. I'm trying really hard to be harsh with my 5 stars, and I think this is the 3rd or 4th 5-star that I have given this year. I loved it so much. I did sob at the end. I was like sobbing into my dog's fur. It was very much like A Man Called Uwe, like that type of really bittersweet and heartwarming type of book. So this follows our main character Wallace, and he was pretty much hated in life. He was a very harsh man. He soon has to accept the fact that he is dead, and he spends all of his time in this little tea shop that sits in between life and death, and he absolutely refuses to cross over, and he just wants to stay as a ghost in this little tea shop. And it's about him like learning to not only come to terms with the fact that he's died, but learning how to be a better person, and learning that he actually wasn't very happy in his life by being such a horrible person. He thought that he was, but he wasn't. And I just adored this book so much. It does very much deal with topics of grief and loss, so if that's not something you feel like you could read, then I would stay away from it. But I will say that it does handle it in a very sensitive way, and the whole book itself is just kind of an exploration of grief, both from people who have lost someone, but also from my main character who is grieving for himself. A beautiful book. One of my favourites that I have read all year. Definitely my favourite of the month. And I am just so in love with this story. It will become a comfort read of mine for sure, and I could not recommend a book more than I recommend Under the Whispering Door. And so then the final book that I picked up I actually finished yesterday, so just in time for the end of the month, and that is Potent Pleasures by Eloisa James. I started watching Bridgerton season 2 and then I only wanted to read Regency romances. There was a period of time where I was super into Regency romances, and I think I might be really getting back into them again. So I picked this one up because I read Eloisa James before, so I knew that I liked her. And so this follows our main character Charlotte, and she goes to a masquerade ball when she is 16, and she is very willingly ruined in the garden with a masked stranger, and then many years later she encounters this masked stranger again, and it turns out that he is in fact an earl, and he is interested in her, but he has absolutely no recollection of who she is at all, which leads to all kinds of questions about, was he actually the man that she was with in the garden that night. Did enjoy this book. It definitely scratched the itch of a Regency romance. I really enjoyed the smutty goodness of this book, and I really liked Charlotte as a main character. However, I could not rate this book particularly highly. I only gave it 2 stars. For one thing, this whole like miscommunication trope is not one of my favourites. I can kind of forgive it and accept the fact that it's just a bit of a staple of a romance book if you want there to be conflict. But the miscommunication in this book happens in the prologue / chapter 1 and literally doesn't get resolved until the epilogue. And so knowing that we know something that the love interest doesn't really makes it difficult to accept that they're actually in love with each other. Like, obviously they have their conflict and they get back together, and it's really difficult to kind of like root for them or really want them to be together when you have to wait for the epilogue for all of the conflict to like truly be resolved. I didn't really love that element. And then the other thing that really got on my nerves with this book is that being ruined or being seen as ruined is a major plot point of this book. Yet our characters are constantly alone with men, are caught alone with men, are gossiping with each other about kissing men and like doing inappropriate things with men. Yet none of them are ever actually like ruined. There's never any consequences to this happening. I was getting a little bit irritated with how carelessly it was kind of written that women would be alone with men, when Eloisa James had made a point of making being ruined a plot point, but then whenever it was like convenient for her, she didn't want to mention it. Like, she wanted her characters to be alone and she just didn't want to talk about the consequences of that. It felt like she was really picking and choosing when that was going to be a problem. This one was a little bit of a miss for me. Like, it was very enjoyable, but too many things were getting on my nerves with it, sadly. And so here we have my March reads. A couple of them were ebooks, which is why that pile doesn't look particularly impressive, but I am massively impressed with myself in the month of March. I know most of them were in a 24-hour challenge, but I'm still super impressed with myself that I was able to read more in half a month than I have been able to in the past 2 entire months. I might actually be getting back into this reading thing. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought, or what some of your highlights of the month were down in the comment section. I would absolutely love to hear them. If you did enjoy and you want to stick around to see some of my other content, you are very much welcome here. You can hit that big red subscribe button down below if you would like. I upload twice a week on a Wednesday and a Friday, so there is no shortage of bookish content here for you to enjoy. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. You're enjoying everything that you are reading, and there are no reading slumps in your future. And I will see you for my next video. Bye guys.